So, guys, I want to do the worldwide privacy tour, and I'm at one of my jobs right now. And what I have to kind of say is that I've been so busy with work that I've had a hard time just finding time to review things. I would like to step outside and review it, but it's really cold where I live. So, the worldwide privacy tour is is a very multi-layered episode. Like on one side, it is about the prince and princess of England. Like the queen is dead, so they're talking about like how they want privacy, but they keep making noise and a lot of things like that. So it's kind of like that hypocrisy, and that also that just being blind to your actions. Oh well, I want privacy, but I'm going to draw attention to myself by being on the news, being disrupting a funeral, and then also publishing a book. And then once they move to South Park, they're setting off fireworks and they're harassing Kyle and everything like that. And the other side of it, of this episode, is that the other side of this episode is like the stuff that happens with Kyle. First of all, Kyle has an issue with Ike because Ike is very, very obsessed with the Queen passing away. Like it's 4 months ago, and he's mad that I keeps like replaying the video on YouTube. So I kind of like this because there are human beings, and especially nowadays with the super sensitivity culture, where people just have a hard time moving on. And it's actually very similar to 9/11 for those who've not been alive. Like when the World Trade Center collapsed, it was really until I think it was really until like mid October, like over 30 days that they were covering the event, and there were some people like I remember like it was traumatic for a lot of people, but there were like some people who would be watching like CNN and all that stuff over and over. But when Pearl Harbor was attacked in the 1940s, we don't have a lot of just recording of how people responded to that back then. Like were people like watching the news over and over, but back in the 40s it was almost like there were like a few news programs, and then people got into World War II. But when it was like 9/11, there was a lot more news coverage and media, so it was easy to kind of just for people to just if they wanted to rewatch it many times they could. So it's also kind of the warning. It's also like a danger of like the internet and that thing too about how sometimes if there is a traumatic event, it allows some people who have an issue of not moving forward with their lives to just be stuck on it. So that's the issue with Ike, but the main issue is with Kyle. So because Ike is using up the computer just to rewatch the funeral over and over again, what happens is that he can't play video games with his friends, and they're keeping a storyline where Stan and Token are friends because their parents are both on weed farms. So Kyle kind of feels little left out, and then also too like Kyle feels like people are not respecting him, or he's an outcast because he keeps bringing up the queen, like the queen, the prince, and the prince's wife and their drama. So people just kind of ghost him. So what happens is Butters says he needs to work on his brand, and a brand really is that you just go to a professional company and they give you a personality. Like they say, okay, you know what, you're like Kyle, you don't let things get to you, and you're a victim. So it's a very interesting satire because first of all, every single time they give you a couple of characteristics, it's as I said, it's what people would like about you, and that's not always the best thing because you're just being somebody that's like, okay, well, I got to satisfy other people, and so you're becoming kind of fake. And it's also true because what's happening nowadays with social media and a lot of like self-help, or sometimes when people do things like talk to a therapist, or I want to go on 5 or find someone to talk to, you find people who are amateur, and they may encourage toxic habits like satisfy other people instead of just satisfy yourself. The other thing that I like about this episode is that every single time when they go to Cumhammer, the company where he creates an image and persona for people, there's two things that I like. Is that Cumhammer, to me, it's a reference to a dick. You know, obviously cum and the word hammer, so it's like a masturbation reference, but it's it's another way of saying a dick. Like they're teaching you to be a dick. Like you know how Brian Griffin, like how when Brian Griffin had trouble with women, he went to Quagmire's class, and Quagmire's class said that this is not a class for romance. This is a class on how to get women, and the best way to get women is to be a douchebag. And it's kind of like the same thing. And then also another thing that I like is that every persona, the last thing that they include in your persona is a victim, and I like that because nowadays, you know, there's this huge culture of being a victim, or also just saying, you know, well, you know, they did this in the DNA and Me episode of South Park where, you know, all the white characters find out that they have a black ancestor or Native American ancestor. So they're like, okay, well, I can play the victim card or say that, you know what, somebody in my past was affected by genocide or slavery, so therefore I'm a victim. But it's also keeping this toxic mentality we see in American culture of being a super victim. And I think like towards the end of the episode that Butters gets in a fight with Bebe because part of his personality adjustment is to be a jerk and whatever. So Bebe beats the shit out of him, and I kind of like that because you never see Bebe act like that. You'd kind of expect Wendy to do it, but once again, it's part of subverting expectations. You would think Wendy's the fighter, but also Bebe does that, and also too that Butters walks away proud of it. Like he doesn't kind of feel bad about what he did. So Kyle just like takes him back to Cumhammer, and it's kind of cool too because it's almost like Kyle tries to be a new person. And I think when Kyle changes his personality, he's more like the Jersey Shore Kyle. But he kind of realizes that that's not who he is because he's seen Butters get beaten to a pulp, and he's like, you know what, I got, you know, Butters is my friend, and Butters is very impressionable. So, you know, I want to just remove Butter from a situation that he caused because he's naive. And I also like how they had Bebe fight back because, you know, that happens in a lot of like a lot of things you see in America where women are allowed to assault men, or if women are bigger and stronger and they take a fight too far, there's no consequences. But if it's a man beating on a woman, or a woman standing up for herself and they take it too far, but if a woman's bullying a man, or if there's a little girl bullying a boy and the boy hits her back, you know, then it's like assault or violence against women, but vice versa, nobody really cares. So, so the episode really concludes with Kyle giving a speech by just saying that, you know what, we have to accept our weaknesses as people. We shouldn't be creating a false personality. And a bunch of the kids walk out of the Cumhammer let us create your own personality place. So I think that's a good message, you know, that we have to accept our faults, and we also just, even as adults, accept our faults and look inwards to change instead of just try to create a brand. Because what happens is that when you become a celebrity, you are becoming a brand or something marketable. So that way you lose your individuality and you lose your happiness because you're just meeting other people's expectations. And also, even if you're a celebrity, people put like their own stigmas on you. So like, you know, the queen of, like the princess of England and the prince of England, people, they're usually beloved celebrities because of Princess Diana, but people's definition of the current prince and princess is that they're spoiled, entitled, and they're dishonorable. And I also like the prince's memoir. It's called Wah. So I like how they're satirizing that, you know, he comes off as a big crybaby. And one thing about the prince is that he looks a lot like Vincent van Gogh. And I also love the ending of this episode because all the South Park kids like just hang out with Kyle and they say like, you know, it looks like you're going through a hard time. Let's play basketball. And Kyle just sees his brother on the laptop again, and he's kind of like, you know, mad because his brother's like watching the funeral for, you know, 5 or 6 months straight. And then he's like, no, you have an issue, you know, like things get to you, you're sensitive, but I understand it's your personality, so I respect that. And I think I love the ending because it seems like all the kids kind of come together and they really just really respect Kyle, and they start to be a little bit more sensitive, and they become like they're there for Kyle, just play basketball, be cool, and then the prince wants to get involved and he just plays his drum set. So I think they're showing sensitivity in two ways. Like, you can be so sensitive to something, you could be like a prima donna, like the prince, or you could be so under you could be very not understanding, like Kyle. I'm sorry, guys. Like, what happens is, like, I'm just hiding in one of the bathrooms, but just to do this review. But what I would say is, I would conclude it by saying that the best sensitivity is to be sensitive of what other people are going through instead of just your ego or being frustrated with your family or just with celebrities or whatever. We got to be mindful of what other people are going through, and I think that's the main message. And it almost, I can't cry, but almost made me, like, have an invisible tear to say, wow, I really like the South Park kids and how they care about each other, because there's definitely a lot of fourth wall jokes. And one of the fourth wall jokes, like, you see with Trent Boyette and other ones, that they all understand they're part of this really fucked up South Park universe. So it seems like, it's cool that when people, like, the biggest thing we learn from the sensitivity culture is to understand somebody's going through a hard time and respect them and be a healing hand versus just being arrogant and selfish. And I think that that's the main message. And I also think that another message that people have to understand is that, nobody's hollow on the inside unless you just be super fake or think that you need to be somebody that you're not. And you have to work hard on never being that person. And if you lose your identity, you almost have to recraft your identity, but you have to find yourself instead of paying an organization to find yourself or going on Instagram or social media to kind of create a fake persona. You have to create the persona yourself. Like, when I was in high school, I remember trying to find my identity, and I remember having a very hard time with it, and I remember always being knocked down every single time I've tried to find a bad identity. Like, I'm biracial, but I lived in a lot of white communities where I was just the black kid, and I was misdiagnosed with autism. So I was kind of looked in the mirror and saw myself as a autistic nigger or a special needs nigger or a retarded nigger, because I've dealt with so much racism and people calling out my race. That's how I felt about myself. But when I went to college, I worked very hard. Then I kind of said, I'm a badass hard worker. I'm actually multiracial, so I'm a multiracial hard worker and somebody that wants to get better and better at myself. And it was good because, when I was in high school wanting to have a hollow identity, have a fake identity, I was dressing up like a pimp, I was acting like a gangbanger, and there was a time where I was being a little bit like Uncle Ruckus. And then the other thing is that when I was getting in trouble, my parents would always bring up a disability. Like, I'm misdiagnosed. I'm not autistic. I was misdiagnosed with autistic. So I remember each time I got myself in trouble, my parents would bring up my disability, or sometimes they'd break my balls. But what I had to learn the hard way, being 35 years old, is that every single time they brought it up, it's because I was fucking up. And that's a consequence. That, if I'm being ignorant, then people with not a lot of education about disability, who are my parents, will make choices or say things that are hurtful when they're trying to be helpful, but it actually comes off as more hurtful. But that's how I struggle with my identity. But I'm happy that I found my own, and we got to do that. Don't look at social media to find an identity. When you are becoming a celebrity, you have to make sure you don't lose yourself. And life and drama and the pressures of being a celebrity helps us makes it easy to lose your identity. But you have to look inwards to find it. And also, therapy is good, but you can't just be fake. And also, too, as we learned from this episode of South Park, the biggest issue with a lot of people's identities nowadays is trying to say that they're a bit of a victim of something. And while people say that, because you can do a DNA me and find out that you have a heritage of a Native American, black, or whatever group that's been treated badly, or you've gone through hard things in your life, you have to put things in perspective. I've had a rough life, but it's not the same thing as somebody who was biracial, who was dealing with lynchings and whatever, 100 years ago, or it's not like I lived through World War II or something like that. So, we got to put our lives in perspective. All right, I'm very happy to do this review with you guys, and it's a little frustrating that I've been so busy that I haven't had enough time to kind of sit down and find a private space to do this, but I'm happy that I've got what I want to say out, because this is a very cerebral episode, and that's why I continue to watch South Park. They do care about quality. I don't see that in The Simpsons or Family Guy, so that's why I stick with South Park, and I'm happy to review their shit because they work hard. They work very hard to be better and better.